welcome. You are tuned in to CrossTalk. My name is Kevin Tocci, and I will be your, as long as my voice holds out, for this episode. What do we talk about here? We talk about some of the things that are going on in and around the community. Fun topics, sometimes serious issues that need conversation. Today we're going to talk with an individual who you'll recognize, as he is an elected official, but he's also the founder of a new media website. We have Justin Evans, who is a member of the Whitman Select Board. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kevin. Glad to be here.
Do your best to stick with me because of the voice. Yeah. But let's talk a little bit about SouthShore.news.
Yep.
You are the founder. What inspired you to create this?
The inspiration really goes back to, actually I think that the initial inspiration was Brockton's municipal elections in 2023. So there was a competitive school committee race. The next day I was trying to find the results and I just couldn't. And I was like, why? Brockton has local media. You know, the Enterprise covers pretty well in the area. But as you can imagine, the reporters are stretched pretty thin. And something like an election result should be a really easy story to produce. The city clerk published the results somewhere on the town website. I didn't know where to look. And that was eventually where I found it, but it just seemed like a news gap. And that kind of spun into, well, what tools are out there? What works well? And I immediately thought of AI, which is something that I've been playing around with. Just, I'm an engineer.
You're a tech guy.
Yeah, I like to mess around with new toys when they come out. And so a couple months later, I just couldn't get it out of my head and thought, we have recordings, local media access stations all over the Commonwealth that put out recordings of public meetings. A public meeting, select board, school committee, planning board, what have you, is just a sequence of these are the votes that were taken, these are the decisions that were made, and it's pretty routine that something like an AI tool would be able to summarize it well. So that was the initial idea.
What would you say makes SouthShore.news unique compared to other news outlets or websites?
I think there's a few people trying AI news. I don't think to the same scale as me. I talked to someone in Western Mass doing kind of the same thing in just Chicopee, of somebody in Florida doing something similar, but there's not really someone trying to get, the South Shore is a big area with a lot of small boards meeting all over the place. So I think that's the difference. And really comparing it to the things that exist, the Whitman-Hanson Express, the Plimpton-Halifax-Kingston Express, the Clipper, Hull Times, Abington News, even the online ones, they're not covering and I'm not covering every community meeting, but they're not reporting necessarily in every select board school committee meeting. They're not picking out things. If something I can do, if I see a planning board meeting with a lot of YouTube views, I can just drop it in, generate a quick story, edit it, and 15, 20 minutes later, there's a complete summary of what happened in that meeting. So it's the ease of generation that really makes the difference.
So how do you define the mission and the vision of the website and the news that it's providing?
I think it's the mission really is to fill the news gap. So something I struggled with early on was I don't want to replace the existing media that's here. I want to kind of help them succeed. So if you look at something like The Anchor in Hingham and Cohasset, they do a really good job on the public interest stories, on the sort of the personal stuff. The Plymouth Independent does a great job on the investigative reporting. That's an area where I could backfill some of the other stuff that they need to report on. The Plymouth Select Board voted on whatever 32-foot artificial tree. Sure. They don't necessarily need to assign a reporter to that. Or even an example I like to give is Plymouth had a 9-hour special town meeting in the fall. The Independent had 2 reporters there. I don't know if they switched off or how they managed it, but the Byline had 2 reporters reporting on a 9-hour town meeting. That same meeting took me about 20 minutes to produce a story. Mine wasn't as good. I certainly give them that. But it got the gist. It was probably 80, 85% as good. And does that trade off freeing up 2 reporters for a day to work on something else? Is that something that would be worthwhile for another media organization to work on? Because what else could they have done in that, let's say, 16 man hours?
So what kind of stories and topics does SouthShore.news prioritize?
So right now, South Shore News is working in 19 communities across the South Shore. So it's mostly select board and school committee meetings. I've got Weymouth's town council. Weymouth was the last town I was able to incorporate. And then as I see something with a lot of interest, you never know exactly what small board is going to suddenly generate a lot of interest, but if there's buzz on Facebook, or I think I mentioned a YouTube link gets a lot of views. Abington Conservation Commission is getting a lot of views for some reason. So one of those stories is going to publish in a couple of days. Just if you see, a planning board meeting getting more views than a select board, that kind of catches my eye. I'm not sure what's going on there, and so I'll generate a summary, see if it's worth making a story out of.
I think a lot of times, like a select board meeting, isn't necessarily longer than an hour, unless the topic focuses on budget or some kind of an issue that is really important to the community, that they're going to come out and attend the meeting and want to be vocal about it. Planning board, zoning board, conservation, those meetings, due to my many years of experience covering these meetings, can tend to run 2, 3, 4 hours. And a lot of times there are issues or things that are going on that people are adamant about, and maybe they're not, maybe somebody is going to build, there's going to be development in the community where they want to keep the small town feel.
Yeah.
And so that's what I find as being why those generate so much interest. How do you decide what issues are most relevant to your audience?
So really, I am starting with kind of taking my lead from how the Whitman-Hanson Express and the sister paper in Plimpton, Halifax, and Kingston covers. It's, you start with the select board and school committee because those are the decisions that will probably impact the most people in town or draw the most interest. And then from there, it's, in MBTA communities has been the big topic in the area for the last couple of months. I've been looking for the planning board hearings, the zoning board hearings for those, and generating, where is the district? And it's pretty easy to take a summary of of town council or the chair of that commission explaining where they drew the district and transcribing it into something that can be summarized.
Who's your target audience, and has their response helped to shape the platform so far early on?
Yeah, so I think my target audience early on has really been the most engaged in the communities, which tend to be either the public officials or the ones who, would like to attend these meetings but don't necessarily. It's still growing. I've been working at this for about 6 months, but I think that has been the foundation of it. Getting feedback from select board members, planning board members, school committee members in different towns has really helped. And now there's a few of them that will, after a story publishes, reach out to me and say, hey, that police chief retired. You got to update the name. Because that is the risk with AI. Usually I catch that kind of stuff in editing, but every once in a while.
Are you the only set of eyes, or are there other set of eyes that look at it? Does the missus who, Kathleen is somebody who is well-schooled and an educator. Does she kind of look at it sometimes if you need her to?
Only if I've got, she's an English teacher, an excellent, super great resource to have in the house. Not particularly on the semantics of public meetings, though.
Okay.
But yeah, I think I've asked her about, she taught in Plymouth for almost 10 years. She's at Whitman-Hanson now. But when was reporting on Plymouth school committee meetings, I'd occasionally ask her, is this the right principal in that school? Or that kind of stuff. Saves me from having to look up, rosters of district personnel.
Are you able to find out what your demographics are, or what demographics are trending more so when they're reading it, or do you not have that information yet?
I am able to get which of my subscribers are opening the emails. I don't necessarily look at that right now. My mindset now is really just continue to grow. And as long as I'm putting out stories that are being read by a lot of people, that I am looking at, which stories are getting the most views, but not necessarily diving into who is reading them.
Okay. Do you encourage reader contributions or interaction? If so, how?
So I am looking for, obviously this is AI-based news system. It does have a tendency to hallucinate, I think is the word that is used in the industry. I think I've gotten pretty good at the editing process on learning, its dates that it tends to get wrong, its names, its spellings. Streets, some of the streets in Plymouth are spelled not how you would assume. So that's been a little bit of a learning curve for me. I think when I've pushed out stories that have immediately got feedback, and like it's been the spellings of people's names. I've caught it every time, but for some reason, the AI system keeps trying to put Dr. Gary Maestas as the superintendent in Plymouth, and he retired 2 years ago.
Yep.
So it's pulling.
Chris Campbell now.
Exactly.
Yep.
It's pulling information
Dr. Chris
from somewhere online to check it, but it's not necessarily the most up to date.
Well, I mean, Gary had a long tenure, so I can see why it would still assume that. Biggest challenges that you faced when you first started this out?
So I started this out really, I took my engineering background. This was a can I do it technical challenge for me. And with that, it was finding the right systems. So my process really is, get a meeting, transcribe it so I have a full text transcription of it. It's not necessarily going to be accurate. That I found a fairly easy to use commercial product that did it, for cheap. And from there, it's use an AI system to summarize it. And so that step there, getting a summary that reads like a news article, was probably where I had the most challenging time.
Okay.
I would say the biggest challenge I face now is the timeliness of publications for the videos going up, for me to grab my source content. So it depends now on local cable access channels all over the South Shore, making sure that they upload their school committee meeting within a couple of days and not a week or two later, because by then the information is starting to get a little outdated. Even now, working with 19 communities, an issue I faced around the holidays was they all had their meetings on December 16th, 17th, 16th, 17th, and 18th. Every town across the South Shore got everything in before a roughly 2-week break. And so the stories that I published for the next 2 weeks were from those 3 days. I'm trying not to I don't want to push out 19 stories in a day. I'm trying to do 2 or 3 on any given day, because most of the subscribers subscribe to all 19 towns. Although you can dial it back, most have received it all, with the audience being a lot of public officials interested in, this is how we're doing it here, how is someone doing it in Plimpton or Hanover. Yeah.
Talk about milestones, the successes that you are proud of to date.
I think, so the first 6 months that I worked on it, it was, I would say, sort of in the dark. I kept my name off of everything, not knowing if I was going to go anywhere with this, and knowing that there's the obvious appearance of a conflict of interest reporting on Whitman Select Board meetings. So that is the challenge I'm facing personally now. I have a disclosure at the end. I actually reached out to Rick Collins over at Abington News to say, how have you faced this dealt with this in the past?
Right, because Rick, just so folks know, Rick is a planning. He serves on multiple committees. He's on the planning board committee. He chaired the charter review committee. So he's a guy who has sat on committees, and still he writes. He's been doing it since the onset of COVID.
Yeah, and he saw the same, I think, local news gap that I saw. He's been a great resource. He's encouraged by what I'm doing. I think there may be a chance to collaborate between the two of us in the future.
Okay.
Which I think is a good opportunity to grow with other local news organizations.
Talk to me about, so can we kind of stay in the realm of journalistic integrity and accuracy? How do you stay true?
So that's been an area I've had to learn. By either public service or engineering, I've not spent a lot of time in journalism, apart from sitting on this side of the table from you. It's really knowing that what I'm producing, try to maintain a level of accuracy and eliminate any bias. So the obvious concern is the committees that I sit on. If I'm reporting on those, there's there could be an appearance of bias that I really need to keep out of there. Keep a disclosure. But I think that there's an opportunity here where there's, I would say, lessening trust in the media just generally. I think there may be a chance for something that's a little more machine-based to say, this doesn't really have a human bias. It may have a bias based on it's summarizing a meeting, whatever the bias of that meeting was, it may input into the stories. But it's not coming at it with, the tool I'm using doesn't understand the MBTA Communities Act. It understands how it's being described by the chair of a planning board up before a town meeting. So I think that it's a different kind of bias. There may be a machine bias, but I think there's a chance to, at least from the public's perspective, remove an appearance that some journalists may have a bias one way or another on an issue.
Yeah, it's becoming tougher and tougher these days. I'm somebody I've practiced neutrality,
Yeah.
and it's tough because I have been accused over the years of being, either a Democrat or being a Republican. I'm unenrolled. I'm proud to be unenrolled, and because of that, I also don't vote, because once you vote, then people know your voting record.
That's true.
And
Yeah.
so that's the idea of it. If I want to maintain a neutrality, I don't vote. And I got people will get mad at me, like, why don't you vote? And I'm like, I don't, because I have a mission. I'm not saying I'll never vote again. If I step away from the news business, then I'll do that. Talk about balance. How do you balance the hard news with the lighter and more community-focused content?
Really, I'm not putting a ton of thought into that. It's really working with what the boards are presenting. So I do try to have at least one story from every select board and school committee meeting, and then as other things come up, I'll try to pull one of those in. So if there's a lighter select board meeting, recently Rockland dedicated a park to a firefighter that had passed away back at the movie theater fire in Brockton. How many years ago?
Strand Theater.
Yeah, the Strand Theater.
Yep.
And that was the main point of that meeting. So that was more of a personal story than I've usually published.
Yeah.
That one got a lot of traction on Facebook, and I think you can understand why. It was a sort of a more meaningful story to a lot of people. Whereas I think Hanover exploring the override, their budget issues, it's going to be a very difficult year in the town of Hanover this year. They recently moved their transfer station outside of the budget into an enterprise account, and there's no local media really covering it. So I think the South Shore News is the only organization, to my knowledge, covering Hanover's budget issues this year.
So would you say you're more municipal focused, you're more meeting focused than, let's say, hey, they're voting on Christmas trees in the park?
Right. I think that's my focus. If that's the only thing that happens in a meeting, that is probably what we'll get written about.
Okay.
But I think that the information that I can provide to the public, especially with my background, because I am editing these, trying to add some context, is really on how these operations work in local government. So, the South Shore Tech building project, I was able to add a footnote after every town meeting voted on it to say, there are 9 member towns, 6 need to vote on it for this regional agreement to be amended.
Right.
So far, these have voted. 4 have voted to approve it. 2 more are needed.
Yeah, it's also worth noting, folks, that actually there's upcoming, at the time of this taping, in a little more than 3 weeks, there's going to be a vote on January 25th for this, and this will be for the funding mechanism for it. So we actually have a scheduled conversation. Again, hopefully my voice will hold out with Dr. Tom Hickey, who is kind of spearheading and he's kind of working this to be able to build a new school for the South Shore Technical High School. So where do you see South Shore, SouthShore.news in the next 5 years? Where do you see it?
I mean, it's really in its infancy, yeah.
Okay.
I would like to see, I will probably try to find a way to monetize it. I mean, at this point, it's free. I don't know if that looks like a subscriber fee. I built it on Substack, so there's an easy way to turn on $5 a month-ish subscription fees, or partnering with local media organizations. I know that the Gannett papers that still exist out in a lot of the communities, the Mariner down in Situate and Cohasset, that kind of thing, are publishing shared USA Today articles, maybe something from the State House News Service if it's relevant to the area. I think I could be a partner media organization for them to publish these local meetings without necessarily starting up my own papers around the area. So I think that is probably the direction I'm going to look, and hopefully I can hire a professional to do some of the reporting and editing if I am able to turn this into a business.
How'd you settle on the interface that you have now? And I will say, the one thing that I appreciated looking at some of the stories is you may have a main story, but then later on, you'll have bullet points like, oh, this happened, and this happened, and this happened.
Yeah, and so that has been, that was what took me so long to find the right tool that summarized it appropriately. Yeah. So the system I'm using is built on Anthropic's Claude for the summary portion, and it is designed for journalism. So finding that was huge. And after that, it got pretty easy. It's just a matter of coming up with the process for myself.
Is there a hope so if you're able to monetize, will you look to maybe add another Justin, add another body, and maybe you can expand coverage and some features?
I think so. It's about as big as I think I can manage myself right now. 19 towns is a lot. There's a lot of meetings going on. But I think there's value in, I've occasionally pulled stuff from the city of Brockton when they had 3 different studies related to how the school funding got out of whack a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I pulled those in, summarized those studies, and presented one article of, across these 3 studies, this is what went wrong. That was early on. I don't think a lot of people saw that article, but it was an interesting, can I do this with this tool process for me. So I would like to see expanded coverage. There's really no reason I can't scale it up except my own time.
How do you plan on keeping up with the changing landscape when it comes to digital journalism?
That's a good question. I think I'm on the front edge of the change, hopefully. That this is probably a way that larger organizations are going to look. It's a tool that exists. It's fairly a commercial tool that any media organization could find and license. I've just put the pieces together before many others. I think that keeps me ahead. Hopefully, there's been some AI tools that are allowed to or enable you to create podcasts from a written story. It's a not quite robotic voice, but definitely not a human voice.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to go in there yet, but it's something I thought about. There's a lot of different ways this technology is evolving, and it could open up different opportunities for to get more information out in the public on what's happening in their communities without the man hours that it takes currently.
What made you take more of a regional approach than just sticking with Whitman, your hometown, as a model?
So the need wasn't necessarily in Whitman, because I think the Whitman-Hanson Express does a great job in what I'm trying to do. I even went back and forth early on. Whitman was not one of the first towns I pulled in. I eventually added Whitman because I know it was sort of a check for me. I know what's going on in these meetings, so how accurate is this tool I'm using producing stories?
Okay.
And then I just kind of kept that going as it expanded. But the towns that I really started with and have been the ones that have really taken off have been Pembroke, Hanover, Norwell a little bit. The towns that don't necessarily have an express covering what's going on in the community. Hanover in particular, I think because of their budget challenges, it's really taken off there. I don't know, maybe 200, 250 subscribers live in Hanover.
Since this is launched, have you faced any criticism or controversy? And if so, if you have, how have you addressed them?
I have, and it's funny, if you don't understand the way that these tools work, you might not quite get it. So the way that it produces a story, I take a meeting, it summarizes that meeting and creates a story from that meeting. It doesn't look for context outside of any one particular meeting. So there was a planning board meeting. Actually, it was a select board meeting. I'm not even going to get into specifics. I'll leave that individual alone. But a select board meeting talking about potential zoning changes in town. A planning board meeting followed that meeting up that reversed direction. So when the select board meeting published, the planning board had already reversed course. And so I got a little bit of pushback on that. I got, SouthShore News has been banned from one town's Facebook page because of that.
Really?
Because it was out of date information. I wouldn't even say inaccurate because it was accurate to the meeting that I worked on. But 3 days later, there was a planning board meeting that totally reversed course, and then my story came out. So someone raised a stink, a member of the planning board, and I got kicked off a Facebook page for it. But that's been I think the biggest pushback. After that, it's journalists that get a little worried that I'm coming for their jobs or that kind of thing. I think that is a concern. I'm really trying to emphasize that that's not what I want to do here. I want to keep the local papers going. I think they provide a great resource, but I think I can take some of the more mundane meetings off their hands. You don't need to sit through a 2.5-hour school committee meeting to find out MCAS results if I can produce that story for you in 15 minutes.
Well, fortunately, there are access centers like Whitman-Hanson Community Access that covers whether it's a video of the meetings or audio files that are available. But the biggest challenge that WHCA faces is our funding mechanism.
Yeah.
What can you do? What can you say to the people who are tuned in regards to maintaining, an organization like WHCA in order to kind of help provide this information and help an AI-driven site like yours?
Yeah, so I mean, my site would totally collapse without the resources of WHCA or the partner organizations around the South Shore doing the same work. The local scene, Area 58,
Right.
any of them taking the time to record these meetings and post them online to really cover them.
It's a lot of man hours.
It's a lot of man hours,
Yeah.
and it's my story totally relies on it. My tool totally uses it. I think the funding mechanism for local cable access worries me. I don't have cable in my house, so I'm not contributing. I think the State House every year considers a bill that may or may not shift some of the
streaming bill.
Streaming bill,
Yep.
exactly. That gets some other fees because I watch WHCA. I just watch it on YouTube or on live stream on their website.
Right.
And I think there should be a way for them to recoup some of the funding that they're losing from Comcast.
Probably one of my final questions. What advice would you give to someone who is looking to start their own news platform?
I think what helped me was just trying. So I spent, a couple of months trying to find the right tool, seeing if it would work, dialing in the stories. But until I signed up for a domain, SouthShore.news, and put it out into the world to start getting feedback,
Yeah.
even anonymously, early on when I was just sharing SouthShore.news articles on town community Facebook pages to see what the feedback was and how people pushed back on it, that was really when I started to develop a feel for how this is going to work. So I think you just have to try it. It's fairly low input early on. It doesn't take a lot. It costs a little bit of money if you want to do an AI-based service. But if you're just someone that likes journalism and wants to write about your local community meetings, the resources are there to just sign up for a Substack and do it.
As we wrap up, anything we haven't touched upon, but you want to say in closing? Again, we've been speaking with Justin Evans, who is the founder of SouthShore.news, if you will.
I think the only thing is, if you want to sign up, it's still free. I don't quite know how I'm going to monetize it yet, if I'm going to get there. But go to SouthShore.news, sign up for daily emails, typically 2 or 3 stories a day from 19 communities around the South Shore, ranging from Weymouth down to Plymouth into, let's say, the Silver Lake schools through East Bridgewater, and then back up through Abington into Weymouth again. So that's my region that I'm calling the South Shore. It's a little bigger than the traditional, but I wanted to capture East Bridgewater because they also don't have a local community paper. So there was another news void there.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us and giving us a little insight behind SouthShore.news.
Appreciate it.
You got it. And we want to thank you for tuning into a show like CrossTalk. Until our next conversation, have a great day.